everybody, and welcome to another ASMR video here on the channel. And tonight's video, we have the return of some scary stories on a lot of the non-scary content that I upload. I get a fair few comments saying, when's the next no sleep Reddit video? When's the next let's not meet Reddit video? And I love doing them. I love doing the scary videos. They're a super fun part of the channel, and have become some of the most popular videos here on the channel. So I will never stop doing them as long as you guys continue to want them. But tonight, for our scary stories, I thought we would venture away from the two usual pages we tend to draw our stories from. Tonight I did a little bit of digging around Reddit, and I found some instances of people sharing their true ghost stories. So a lot of times the true scary stories are, home invasions, intruders, stalkers, that kind of thing. These are stories to do with encounters with ghosts or unexplained things that have really happened to people. And I believe for the most part these stories have been sourced from not like traditionally like scary subreddits. It's just like this one is Ask Reddit, which is the one we're going to start with this evening. So as always, get comfortable, prepare to be relaxed, maybe hopefully even a little bit scared at the same time, as is always the case with these videos. So I'm just going to jump straight in, because why not? So on this first Reddit page, and you may have to bear with me as I scroll through and past, replies and stuff, but this user posted, "What are your real life ghost stories you like to tell on dark and stormy nights?" So, the top one. "Something invited itself into my friend's home. I've told this story on another subreddit, but this is the one haunting experience that really freaked me out. When I was younger, I had a next door neighbour named Alexi, and she was my best friend. Our parents would go on trips on motorcycles with each other, and we would camp out at one of our houses until they came back. It was normal for us. We never had any paranormal events prior to this specific night. We were sitting in the bedroom talking and doing what we normally did. We saw a bright light through our window, followed with the sound of motorcycles pulling onto the gravel driveway. We instantly think, okay, our parents forgot something, but before we could even get up to leave the bedroom, we heard a knock, and a soft woman's voice say, 'Hello.' The front door opened. This was a familiar sound because the door scraped against the hard wood flooring. We panicked, thinking there was an intruder at this point because this woman didn't sound like our family, as we have very Texan voices. We scouted the house, scared out of our minds, just to find the front door wide open and nobody in the driveway. Nobody was in the house. We finally felt better. We walked back into her bedroom, but before she went to enter, she collapsed onto the floor and started sobbing. I didn't know what was happening. I was scared. And she told me something as tall as the door frame was standing in her parents' room. After our parents returned, for the following weeks and months, our family continued to have paranormal activity in their house. I soon moved out. See, these kind of accounts do give me the chills more than, say, the no sleep subreddit does, because the no sleep stories are often so well written that you know they're not real, whereas that is something that somebody has lived through. For some reason I just find that all the more chilling. Okay, next account. I know it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but it's 100% what happened to me about 24 years ago. When I was still relatively newly married, my then husband and I moved into a townhouse-style apartment. The 2 floors of our apartment were on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the building, and the management office and mailbox area was almost directly below us on the ground level. The woman who managed the building was older, didn't care for the property well, and usually spent most days chain smoking Camel non-filters in her office. Apologies for the stomach noise, as always. And being a hateful old racist. Imagine renting a place from Juno, the social worker from Beetlejuice, but less helpful. She really resented that we had the townhouse, claiming we lied about my being pregnant when we moved in, because she didn't want to rent that unit to people with kids. She also made a few disparaging remarks about my husband due to his race. She was a real peach, truly. So after kiddo was born, I was SAHM. I'm not sure what that stands for. Let me know down below in the comments. Just busy keeping the house clean. Stay-at-home mum. Stay-at-home mum. I've got it. And the baby occupied without a car or local mum friends. After lunch, the kiddo needed a bath. Anyone who's fed a 9-month-old baby knows the mess that can happen. So I went upstairs and ran the tub. Soon I had the baby sitting happily splashing in one of those suction cup bath seats. Important to note, it's the middle of winter and we had no heat. An issue I'd been fighting Juno the landlord about for a while, among other maintenance issues, like my arcing ceiling fan or the garbage disposal that was held on with duct tape and leaked. We basically had to keep a space heater or 2 in every room to keep the chill away. I had taken one of the space heaters in the bathroom to keep the bathroom warm enough for bath time, and had it sitting out of reach on top of the bathroom counter and out of splashing distance. I was standing in the bathtub, getting ready to lift the baby out, when all of a sudden the space heater started to rock back and forth when it had not been rocking before. I had this horrible feeling of dread as I looked at the heater, and I just reacted, because I knew I couldn't get us both out of the tub in time. I reached down to grab the baby seat, ending up pulling it up off the tub and dropping the baby over the side of the tub to the bathroom floor, just as the heater got to the end of the cord. It thumped into the shower door, bounced off the edge of the tub and landed on its side, on the floor a couple of inches away, where it shut off. When I looked over to the corner of the bathroom, that part of the room seemed to just get darker, like it was filling up with shadows. There was no smoke, no change in lighting, no windows. It was just darker. I also started to smell cigarette smoke, Camel non-filters, which I knew the smell well from being in Juno's office all the time to get things fixed. The smell was so thick it made me cough and my chest ached, but I couldn't see any smoke haze. this overwhelming sensation of hatred and malice, like someone was standing there giving me a death glare. I grabbed the baby and a towel and ran downstairs. I was so freaked out I couldn't bring myself to go back up there, so I used some diapers from the diaper bag and kept the baby wrapped in the towel and cuddled to stay warm. I stayed down there the entire rest of the day until my husband got home. Every so often I'd look up the stairs at the bathroom, but I didn't want to take the baby up there and I was afraid to leave him alone downstairs. When he asked me why the baby wasn't dressed, I told him about the heater and the smoke in the bathroom, and he went up to check, figuring it was yet another maintenance issue. There was no electrical issues, no damage to the outlet, no smoke, no cigarette smell. He put the heater back on the counter and turned it on, watched it for a few minutes and it didn't rock. So it didn't rock itself off the counter earlier. He laughed it off, but later that day we heard Juno's adult son downstairs near the mailboxes yelling his head off at people. And that's when we found out she'd had a massive heart attack in her office earlier that day, and he'd found her dead in her chair, with a Camel non-filtered still in her hand. Oh, I got goosebumps from that one. Oh man. I mean, that's crazy. Like, the only explanation you can have for that is that, like, it's a story, because it reads as a very good story, but these are apparently not fake. Well, here we go. This one. I manage a venue that used to be a Roman Catholic church and was then abandoned and used as a flop house for many years. I am frequently in the building alone late at night by myself, closing up after shows and club nights. Several strange things have happened to me there. Number one, I was really busy setting up for an event, and I was walking along the mezzanine area toward a room that everyone had told me was haunted. And while I do love a good ghost story, I don't really believe in the supernatural on a fundamental level. The last thing on my mind at this time was spooky stuff. I was en route from one area to another, on a mission to do some logistical task or another. I paused at the railing, and suddenly I felt the sensation of being grabbed hard around the ankle, as though from below, which made no sense, as it was a 25-foot drop down to the main floor. I leapt backwards and started shaking my leg. I looked everywhere but saw nothing. Number two, I was taking a meeting in broad daylight with a collaborator. We were sitting on a plush couch in the middle of the space, enjoying our conversation about a potential series of events we could do. Because it was a business meeting, I left one cushion of space between him and myself on the couch. Suddenly, mid-sentence, I felt the distinct sensation of someone walking up to us and then sitting directly between us. We both paused and just stared at the cushion, which was moving. There was an impression as though someone had sat down, and there was a palpable energy and tension in the air. It felt for all the world as though an invisible person was sitting right there. We sat frozen in silence for about 30 seconds, which is actually a long time in the middle of a business meeting, staring at this cushion, until I finally waved my arms through the space in exasperation and laughed. We were both confused and shaken and ended the meeting quickly. Number 3. to supervise a group who was rehearsing in the space. I was hungover and got in the morning, let in the group and went upstairs into a secluded area to take a nap on the couch and wait out my shift. Mid-nap, I woke up suddenly and heard someone slowly descending the stairs from the bell tower. I froze and kept my eyes closed, thinking it was someone from the rehearsing group, and I just wanted them to go away. The footsteps drew closer, and I heard what sounded like a man muttering to himself under his breath. As he leaned over me and grasped my hip hard, he squeezed it until it hurt. I let out a yell and opened my eyes, but there was nobody there. Prob's just sleep paralysis, but very odd. I've never had sleep paralysis like that before. Number 4. Multiple instances of seeing figures in the mirror, hearing doors slam, etc. People calling my name from distant corners when I'm there by myself. The custodian once told me she refuses to clean at night anymore, since she heard someone quietly praying in the confessional at 3 in the morning. Everyone likes to claim it's the ghost of all these Irish Catholic priests and their parishioners, but in my opinion the many years the church sat empty and desolate as a last resort shelter for drug addicts and prostitutes is the more likely window of time where people would have died desperate, lost, and in pain. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I know a lot of people don't have any choice or just don't let it bother them, but I personally would not work in a place like that. I mean, equally I would have to have stuff happen to me in order for me to believe it, but yeah, probably not for me. I'd go and find another venue to look after. Okay, so next one says not very scary but a little tragic, so here it is. Before I was born, my entire family and extended family all went to the beach one day for a picnic in Pakistan. Now I don't know the exact details, however. Back in the day, the smugglers used to bring in electronics from various countries to resell them via boats, and they would park the boats at the beach. Now, from what I have always been told, and I don't know how, if someone does please shed light as I'm always curious, they used to dig holes or something similar during low tides, so when it was full, it would create sort of a vortex or some inward pressure that would help keep the boat steady on that spot as they unloaded. However, once completed, they'd leave, leaving the hole in the ground. So back to the picnic. As everyone arrives, 20 plus people, the kids get out of the cars and run straight to the ocean. And as they enter, they start getting sucked into that hole. One after another, screams ensue, and everyone is trying to save each other. And one after another, they keep going in. Oh my gosh, eventually 14 members of my family drowned and died there in a matter of minutes. It was an absolute catastrophe and extremely tragic. However, the haunting paranormal part of it comes next. Everyone used to live in a massive house all together. Think 4 stories, huge household styled house. So now imagine all of a sudden 14 people gone. It became extremely depressing and empty, that place. One of the floors was completely closed off, as the entire family living there had died. After a few years, it became extremely common and frequent to hear kids playing on that floor, or you'd hear every other night footsteps of someone walking in, putting on slippers and going up the stairs. You could stand there and hear it clear as daylight. I recall a very clear incident. I was sitting on the ground floor lobby, long lobby with doors on each side, with a mirror at the end and a swing in the middle next to the kitchen door. My mum was in the kitchen and I was sitting in the swing facing the mirror as I see two kids peek out of one of the rooms and then run to the adjacent room. I asked my mum if we have guests over and she said no, no one is over. I explained why I asked. She pulled me into the kitchen and explained that day that it's common to see the kids, however not to engage them or go towards them, and to mind my own business. It became extremely common for us to spot these things as we lived there, but no harm was ever done. Once my tutor came home sitting in my room, and I'd always closed the door to my room so there were no distractions. Once he came about and he was sitting facing the door, which I had left open as I was alone at home. He mentioned to me midway if I could close the door, as my family was walking around and it was a bit distracting. I told him no one is home, which he didn't believe, until I took him out and showed him around the whole floor. He absolutely freaked out and immediately left and stopped tutoring me unless I went to his place. Yeah, don't blame him. I moved to Saudi Arabia after that and saw a lot of things growing up, but thankfully I'm not scared of such things or experiences, so I don't get freaked out. But I'd imagine most people would. When you live in the desert, you see things that you can't explain. It's creepy sometimes. I feel like, I was gonna say until the tutor part, I wondered if it was kind of just like a little bit of like they were haunted, but not actually haunted by ghosts, but more like they were kind of a manifestation of their grief kind of thing. But the fact that the tutor saw and heard them as well, I can't, if that's real, honestly, I cannot explain that. I'm not meant to be explaining that. I'm not meant to be sitting here debunking them, to be fair. But man, that is so unbelievably tragic. That's crazy. I've got a little short one here. About a month after my dad died, I was a week into school and slept through my alarm. If I got up then I'd have 10 minutes to get ready before having to leave. I would be late if I didn't get up right then. Suddenly I wake up to a male shouting my name at the foot of my bed. No man stood there, nor was there any male in my house at the time. My mum said she never called me, so I thoroughly believe my dad woke me up that morning so I wouldn't be late for school. I like that. Again, you can put that down to like being half asleep and like kind of dreaming a little bit, but you never know really, I guess. So, I've had a few supernatural experiences, but the one I usually go to is when I worked in a supermarket. I grew up in a farm town, and the only place to get groceries besides the grossly overpriced Shopco on the edge of town was the family-owned supermarket, Robertson's. The Robertson family were very active in the community, but also had a reputation from miserly to straight-up evil, depending on who you asked. If you asked me and the rest of the bag boys, Robertson's had a dark aura around it. Many features contributed, like the vaulted ceilings in the back rooms, the creaking floors in the offices upstairs, and the door hidden behind a pile of old shelves that seemed to lead under the loading dock. The worst was the patriarch of the Robertsons, Blaine. He was too old to handle the business decisions, but he was too stubborn to let his son take it out of his hands, so he spent his days shuffling around the floor, antagonising the bag boys at every turn. He chastised us for clocking in more than 1 minute early. He chastised us for standing at the clock with a minute left in our shift. He chastised us for our laziness the second we weren't actively moving items. I always joked that Blaine was a vampire. He just refuses to die. Why else is there never a call over the intercom for kids who lost their parents? One night, my suspicions were reinforced. Blaine had showed up about 9 to take care of some office work upstairs. With all our closing duties done, my partner for the night and I lollygagged in the stockroom, right at the foot of the office stairs. When 10 rolls around and it was time to close, I figure I'd let Blaine know we were locking up. I started up the stairs and suddenly noticed it was dark. I got to the top and looked around. Not a single light in the offices was on. We had stood at the bottom of the stairs the whole time and Blaine hadn't passed us. Even when Blaine isn't looming like Nosferatu, strange things happen upstairs. The exposed water pipes leading upstairs twang like someone hit them with a hammer. Footsteps on the creaky floor echo through the whole back room. All this happens when the offices are pitch black as we stand next to the stairs. One night, my partner and I got freaked out by the noises from the offices and decided to spend the remainder of the shift lapping the store. But as we walked perpendicular to the aisles, a can of green beans halfway down the vegetable aisle suddenly fell off the shelf. We put it back in place and started walking again. 2 aisles down, another can falls off. This time as I put it back in place, a can 15 feet down the aisle flew off the shelf. We left that one sitting and huddled around the cash registers for the rest of the shift. To top it off though, a bag boy requested to be taken off night shifts after an experience he had in the break room. The break room has 2 small bathrooms, male and female. He was taking his dinner break when he heard a baby crying from the women's bathroom. He had been in there 5 minutes already and hadn't seen anyone come in, much less with a baby. He endured the crying for 5 more minutes before he got concerned and knocked on the door. Repeated knocks and questions got nothing back except for the non-stop crying. He was finally convinced something had happened to the mother and cracked the door open, but the room was dark and empty. A few shorter ones now. One time I was on a family vacation down at the ocean. We had rented a house and was staying there. It was late at night and I had been sharing a room with my sister. She was sleeping in the bed next to me and I was on my phone minding my own business. I began to feel uneasy out of nowhere and began to hear a knocking on the wall right next to me. I started to feel really scared and the knocking grew louder. I looked out the window and saw nothing. I even got up and walked into the room next door where the knocking was coming from and I saw nothing in that room. When I returned back into my room, the knocking had stopped. I woke up my sister and asked if she had heard any of the knocking and she told me no. I was terrified and slept with my sister in her bed for the rest of the night. Yeah, it was rubbish. Next one's even shorter. My grandma passed away 3 years ago. Her birthday was in January. In 2020 her number was still active. It was was a prepaid number. If you paid X amount, your number would be active for a year. Just after midnight on her birthday, my mum sent her a text saying, "Happy birthday, Mum." Just before 1 AM, she received a text from that number saying, "Thank you." We went over the next day just to find the phone exactly where she left it before she died, but the battery was dead. Interesting. Okay, next account. Posted before, but my in-laws' house was haunted by a friendly spirit, and a story about a co-worker. Father-in-law woke up and saw his dog from his childhood sleeping at the foot of his bed. His bed was magical because if you had symptoms of a cold or something coming on and slept in that bed, you would wake up with no symptoms at all. When our son was maybe 10 months old, we were staying at their house and sleeping in the 2 bedrooms upstairs. One day while my wife and I were downstairs watching TV, we heard our son running through the hallways upstairs. As he couldn't get out of the crib at that time, we ran up to see what was going on. He was sound asleep. My co-worker's story was about a tradesman I worked under when I was an apprentice. He later went on to be the maintenance man for our main office building and worked in the basement there. One night, a year or so after he had passed away, a new guard was patrolling the building at around 2 AM and was lost. She said that a guy working in the building gave her directions on how to get out of it. When she reported to the guard sergeant what had occurred, the sergeant said no one should be in that building. When she gave a description of the guy who gave her directions, he pulled out an ID from his desk and asked if that was him. She said yes. It was my former co-worker. Interesting. Right, I am gonna change Reddit page now. We've got, what have we got here? Let's go with this one. So, this was on the nursing subreddit. Scary stories / ghost stories from your hospital or work. So, I'm an EMT and I eat this stuff up. I'm not necessarily religious, on the fence about it, but I've experienced some stuff I cannot explain. I can recall one fairly well. I was in the basement of the hospital grabbing a new gurney as ours was ripped apart from a violent patient. It was 3 AM. The ICU was on the 3rd floor and it was locked down for the night. No visitors in the hospital. The basement storage unit was packed with stuff, so when I felt my shirt get pulled on, I assumed it got caught on an object. Then it happened again, only this time I heard a little girl's voice, crystal clear, say, "I'm lost." My heart was pounding. I felt all the hairs of my body stand up, and I called my partner down to help with the gurney. I've talked to nurses, CNAs, and even some physicians who have had weird experiences, especially in the ICU and hospice side. Okay, let's get into these. I've worked in healthcare for over 20 years now, and I have a couple from working in nursing homes of seeing the figure in black shooting across the hall, and then in the next 24 hours a resident will die, and then in less than a week another one will pass as well. But my favourite story is this. I worked at a very small hospital, maybe 30 beds. It has been around for many, many years. In the basement is, of course, the old morgue, one elevator that goes from the basement to the main floor outside the nurse's station. This elevator would come up in the middle of the night randomly, and the doors would open, and all the staff would get up to go find the patient who just passed away. One night, my co-workers and I were sitting at the nurse's station, and down the shore to our right we hear this TV come on, and the volume is up as loud as it can go. One of my CWs and I walked down, said hold to find the TV to turn it down. There was one room that maintenance has the door closed and do not enter signs on the door. After looking in all the open rooms, there is no other room but the closed one to look in. We open the door. There is nothing in this room except the TV. I walked in, turned the TV, and said, "Stop that, there is a sick baby next door who needs to sleep, so please be quiet." I walked out and closed the door with no further incidents with the TV. So, she basically went in there and told the ghost to shut up, please. It sounds like they obeyed. Fair play. Maybe that's the issue in horror films and stuff. Do people ever ask, please stop, to the demon? It might be worth a try. Okay. This isn't scary, but it haunts me more than anything. I've skim-read. I'm seeing keywords like pregnancy and things like that, and maybe like medical trigger warning. If that's a trigger for you, maybe skip a little bit ahead. So this isn't scary, but it haunts me more than anything. I had a young mother come into labour and delivered for a scheduled C-section for triplets at 33 weeks. As a BGY2, I was doing H&B, an ultrasound for fetal position. She was super squirrely and nervous, so I asked her if there was anything I could do to help allay her concerns. She told me they had warned her of all these terrible things that would happen to her with a multiple pregnancy, and none had. Heck, she'd been mole walking yesterday, and the babies were all projected to be over 4 pounds. Then she said, "I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop." I tried to reassure her that everything looked great. Her CS did go well and all 3 babies were big. I rounded on her that next morning and went off service. I even told her that she hadn't anything to worry about. She died the next day from acute cardiac decomposition in a helicopter on the way to another hospital trying to get a heart transplant. She apparently had been developing dilated cardiomyopathy, and the uterus pressing on her SVC was keeping her compensated. The delivery killed her. She knew. Somehow she just knew. That bothers me more than any ghosts. Oh, that's so sad. That's very sad. Next story. I started my nursing career at a small and very old urban hospital. So small they were closing it all up. I worked in labour and delivery, and we were the only unit left. One night we had to do a reasonably emergent C-section on a patient who was from out of town, meaning she didn't have a support person with her. As far as I remember, the CS was going well. We were in the middle of it when the patient stopped responding to the anaesthetist. Her vitals were all normal, but she just stopped talking to her, stopped responding to questions. I could hear the anaesthetist ask her, "Hey, are you okay?" a few times. After a few minutes, the patient started responding again and all was well. I had in the recovery room, just me and her. The babies were in the NICU, and things were pretty straightforward. But I did mention to her about the strange episode during the CS. She said, "I saw my grandmother in the OR. I was so scared and I asked her to hold my hand, but she told me that she couldn't touch me." That sure was something for a 23-year-old here at 3 o'clock in a room far away from any of my co-workers in a very old and empty hospital. It was my second night with this PD, this patient in his late 80s. He was terminally ill and was leaving for home hospice. In the middle of the night, I go to do vitals and he's talking out loud in his sleep and fidgeting. Hadn't done it the night before. I wake him up and ask him what he was dreaming. Tells me he was dreaming about being with his friends when he was younger, such as going to the bar and partying. Said it was some of his favourite times in his life. I thought that must have been a great dream and left when I finished care. A couple hours later, I left with a co-worker to pick up a patient. When I returned, all of my co-workers are freaking out, even our senior nurses. My patient was on portable video because he could be forgetful at times. On the camera, they had witnessed multiple orbs shooting through the room that had looked similar to shooting stars. We get that from time to time, but they said that there were a crazy amount to where the room looked like it was glowing. Some co-workers even went in to check. When they did, the video person said they'd disappear, then return when staff left. By the time I returned, the orbs had just stopped. About 15 to 30 minutes later, my patient wakes up and decides to get up from the bed. I go in there and thought it was weird for him because he didn't really do that the night prior. I ask him where he's going. He points to an area behind me and says that his friends are here and want to play cards with him. My co-worker who was with me paled. I just said that they should play cards when it was a little later and tucked him into bed. I thought that this whole situation was pretty awesome. My co-workers thought I was nuts. I was like his friends just wanted to stop by and say hi. Yeah, I'd say that's awesome. I don't think that, the orbs thing is weird, I guess. It could just be a fault with the camera. But that's just a man having a nice dream and then sort of half waking up and still being confused once woken up. Don't really think that's particularly scary. One night in an old psychiatric hospital, Adek and I were the only ones up. Every patient seemed to be asleep. Anyway, I was sitting outside the office door and she was sitting at the back of the very small office eating her soup. The other office door to our side suddenly opened and closed, and then the small restroom door in our office closed. Neither one of us said anything for about a full minute. Then I asked her if that had just happened. She sighed with relief and said yes it had, and that she was glad she wasn't losing her mind. I guess the ghost needed to use the restroom in a hurry. Maybe it was a former nurse who worked it. Okay, and to finish this video, let's go to our final subreddit. Here we go. So this was just Ask Reddit, what's your ghost story? I was around 10 years old and living in San Antonio. I got back to the apartment first after school. About 5 minutes of being in the eyes alone, I saw on the reflection of a mirror an older man in a tuxedo was in the kitchen. I flipped out and ran to my room and grabbed a bat. I waited 10-ish minutes before coming out. I locked the door when I got home and never heard the door open for someone to leave. I didn't tell anyone about it. Fast forward 6 years. I was watching Ghost Hunters with my family and my mom asked if I remember the old man in the tux. Next one. My dad's story, not mine. Early 1980s, he is working a summer job at Yellowstone National Park. One day, he and his friend Mark hiked up to the top of one of the mountains. They set up their tent inside an Indian pit, a man-made hole dug out by Native Americans hundreds of years ago. The Indian pits were either used as hunting blinds or spots where young braves came to for their first fishing quest. Later in the night, my dad wakes up and has to use the bathroom. He crawled out of the tent, out of the pit, and went walking a respectful distance away from the tent. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder pull him backwards. My dad calls out, "Hey Mark, what are you doing?" He turns around, flicks on his flashlight, but there is nobody there. He shines the light at his feet and discovers that his next couple steps would have taken him directly over a steep cliff. He did his business and hurried back to the tent. The next morning, the two friends are waking up and his buddy says to him, "I know this sounds crazy, but I woke up in the middle of the night and I swear to you, there was an Indian man standing outside our tent." Whatever really happened that night, my dad is alive. He met my mom in Yellowstone, and here I am writing this story to you today. Oh, this one's a fairly big one. I stayed at my grandmother's house that my father spent a large amount of time in as a kid. My father drove us there in one go and was understandably tired after a 17-hour drive, blimey. We all started to lay down and my father checked in on us before going to bed himself. As he was talking, he stopped himself and told us to cover a large mirror or you will have nightmares. Now, nightmares from a mirror of all things sounded like a little fun to me. But my brothers, who were also sleeping in the same room, asked me to cover it, so I did. I asked my dad about it before he left and he said ghosts use it as an entryway. A week later I brought it up with my grandmother and she scoffed, saying, "Oh, this house ain't haunted." I agreed, but told her that the reason I brought it up was because my dad told me to cover a mirror. My grandmother then changed her expression and said, "Oh, the mirror." Apparently that mirror came from her grandmother. She worked as a nurse and took in those who were going to die, but could not pay for care on their last days. So she made her home into a hospice of sorts. Those who stayed in the room with the mirror saw things. A lovely old lady saw and heard a young lady come into her room and played a harp. She was thankful for the lovely songs, but no person was known, nor was a harp owned or heard elsewhere. A young boy found an older boy who played games with him, and really knew his games. Lastly, a terrible woman who refused to use the bathroom and shat in a cooking pot, then hid it under her bed, and as well as argue, she saw in her words the devil that spat fire at her. rumors of trying to kill her with the devil. I also got stories from my mother seeing the same young lady who played the harp, and my grandfather seeing the devil guy. My grandfather described it as a red man with horns that was too tall for the room he was in, so he, still standing up straight, bent his neck down to fit. It stared down at him and simply asked slowly, "Why are you here?" I kept that mirror covered. When I was in 5th grade, once I forgot to put my school uniform in the laundry basket, so the next day I needed for school it was dirty. I went to have breakfast in my pyjamas while I was thinking how to tell my mum I didn't have my uniform clean. When I came back to my room, there was a woman I have never seen before, in her 40s, brown dress, dark hair, ironing my uniform. I blinked and she was gone. I would have assumed I hallucinated the whole thing, but my uniform was there, clean, dried, ironed, and ready for me to use. And it couldn't have been ironed by anyone else because my parents had breakfast with me, and my sister was a baby. That's just super wholesome, no? It's just a ghost, probably living rent-free and has decided to pay back a favour by doing your ironing for you. I think that's somewhat nice. Okay, next one. Oh, sorry, my back. I have to say, sometimes it's comfortable sitting on the floor, but tonight for some reason I've been fairly uncomfortable. I need to just shove like a cushion or something behind me. Or maybe just sit on a chair would probably be a start. But I like it down here. So, from the time I was about 12 to 17 years old, I lived in what I believed was a haunted house. I've never had experiences like I had in the house since moving out. A few specific memories come to mind. Once I was hanging up laundry in my closet. I heard someone whisper my name in my ear clear as day. I'd never sprinted out of a room so fast. Another time, my sister and I had friends over and we decided to use a tape recorder to ask questions to the ghosts, like they do on those paranormal shows. We played the tape not expecting to hear anything and could hear a very soft voice say, "I'm in the closet." We were sitting near a small closet in the basement. My parents eventually decided to sell the house. We moved into a new place before selling this place. My sister stopped by the house after there had been a couple of showings to turn out the lights in the house. She went to turn off the lights in the basement, which had multiple light switches. One was at the far end of the basement, away from the stairs, of course it was. She turned off the light and swore she heard heavy footfalls of someone running towards her. She ran out of the house without turning out the rest of the lights and locked the door. That was the last time either of us went back until we were in the neighbourhood, and the new owners offered to show us the renovations they made. Nothing happened then, but they did ask us if we wanted to babysit their kids. We politely declined. This is my mum's story, but she is completely sane and I believe it. My parents went to South Carolina for a wedding. They stayed at some old plantation bed and breakfast spot. She was sleeping when she woke up all of a sudden. She had her cell phone plugged into the wall and was on her nightstand. There was a notification on the phone, it was blinking. The female ghost was dressed in a full-on old formal dress and she was fixated on the cell phone blinking light and she was walking towards it. Mum said, "It's okay, it's just a phone." The ghost turned and made eye contact with my mum, then disappeared. Years ago, 2 friends and I were camping in fall in a small tent, staggered with 2 of our heads on one side and one on the other. It was a silent and still night with fog developing in the moist woods. What sounds like a muffled voice on a cell phone starts coming out from the centre of the tent between all our heads. I heard someone keep asking, "Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?" My friend asks, "Are you hearing that?" At once we all sit up and start shuffling around in the tent looking for the phone. There is no phone in the tent. I looked at my friend on the other side of the tent and asked what they heard. It sounded like someone saying, "Hello, can you hear me?" We all agree this is what we heard, and that the sound was coming from the other side of the tent. The next morning we find all our cell phones sitting in the car still, and there's no cell reception at the campground. Still sends shivers up my spine. My dad died a month ago, very suddenly. We're native people, so we believe in the spirit world. Little weird things happened throughout the week of his funeral. After we buried my mother's and his ashes together as they wished, we saw 3 rainbows. Remember the double rainbow guy? I was 3 times full of joy as he was. We went back to my uncle's to relax. The door to their lower patio blew open. We all looked at each other. We woke up the next morning and fresh snow had fallen. It was very early and no one would have been walking around. We saw 2 sets of footprints in the snow in a circle. This is way up north, so people aren't just walking by. What made me happy was, it was 2 footprints. My dad had lost a leg in 2013, so I was glad to know he had gotten it back. I think that's nice. It's comforting, isn't it? I don't believe in the supernatural today, but I used to. Anyway. So there I was, a 7-year-old kid in rural Utah. I was staying the night at my grandparents' house on Main Street. I didn't want to sleep, so around midnight I went down into the basement, as you do. I took my Matchbox cars and played Night City with my glowing better blocks. I had this little metropolis going on when my uncle came down to play with me. Should I mention my great-uncle died when I was 2? Well, he did. Anyway, my great-uncle and I played Night City for a good hour. I remember it like it was yesterday. He drove the Lincoln because that was his favourite car. Anyway, it got late. He had to leave so he wouldn't miss his train. He left and I went to sleep. The next morning I asked when Uncle was coming back to play again. My parents were slightly offended that I brought it up. They hadn't seen him since before I was born and wanted nothing to do with him. He was the black sheep of the family. I said him and I played cars and showed them the car that he drove in our city. They were uncomfortable with this and chalked it up to my imagination. I never met my uncle. Again, he died when I was 2. Over the years since then I have learned that he drove both a train and a Lincoln MK VII. Like I said, I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't know how 7-year-old me knew things about a strange relative who died when I was 2 and was never spoken of due to certain family issues. To this day I don't know what happened that night, but I remember playing Night City with some guy who said he was my uncle like it was yesterday. He was super nice and at the end of the game simply left out the back door. The top reply to that is, imagine it was some random dude who wanted to rob the place, saw you and couldn't bring himself to do it. guess 8 to 10 years old, but that's just a ballpark guess. I shared a room with my younger brother. Our room was very large, and for some reason we put our bunk beds right in the middle of the room, with the side of the bed facing the doorway. I had top bunk. Every morning our mum would come into our room to wake us up for school. It was the worst feeling. This morning I'd already been awake for some time, just laying in bed. It was still dark outside. And depending on the time of the year, I don't remember, it being dark when we were getting up for school might have been normal. So I'm sitting there laying in bed and the door to our room opens. It doesn't take too much effort to turn my gaze to the door. I see a woman in some kind of white gown, who I can only assume is my mother, even though I never recall her ever wearing an outfit like that. Standing in the doorway, she takes a step in, closes the door behind her, and slowly starts approaching our beds. She gets so close that I'm no longer able to see her because of the angle I have for being on the top bunk. I assume she's going to start waking up my brother at any moment, so I do that kid thing where I shut my eyes and pretend to be asleep. I wait and wait and wait. I finally open my eyes. The door is still closed. I'm super confused at this point, so I lean over the railing to see what she's up to, and there was no one there. I freak out and cover my head with all of my blankets and lay there for what felt like quite a bit until I fell asleep. I don't believe in ghosts. I'm sure there's a completely rational explanation for this. Maybe it was my mum and I just didn't hear her open the door and close the door to leave again. Maybe there was no one there at all and I imagined the whole thing. I don't know. It's not a super interesting ghost story, but it's all I've got. It's the only weird story from my childhood that I can't explain today. And that is going to be that. I'd be intrigued if you've got this far in the video and you're still not super sleepy. Let me know your ghost stories down below. They can be nice experiences, scary experiences. I think I've told my one experience in a previous video before, but I'll chuck it on the end again because why not? But I mean, it's not enough for me to believe in ghosts. I don't even really think it was a ghost, but somebody did provide a potential explanation for it, which I've obviously forgotten now. But basically, in my old family home, the family home I lived in until a few years ago when I moved out, probably for the first time, barring uni, we had a kitchen, and basically the kitchen door was, say, to my back is like to the back door, and front on, I'm at the kitchen counter, there's like a hatch, and through this hatch you could look into the living room, and then the exit to the kitchen into the study which led into the living room was to the right. Low hatch in front, exit to the right. Now, a lot of the time, and I had multiple instances of this, where I'd be doing something at the counter. It was usually relatively late at night, so I'd be making a sandwich, having a late night bowl of cereal, whatever. And basically I would see something shift past the hatch, and I would just assume it was a family member. I'm one of 7 in my family, so it could be any person. Usually my brother had a similar sleep schedule to me, so I always assumed it was him. So I would wait for the person to come round, but nobody would ever come. And each time it happened, it wasn't like I mean, there were a few times, right, where I slightly saw it, and I'm a glasses wearer, so I was like, could have just been a reflection of the light, like whatever, didn't really freak me out. But there were other times where, like, clear as day, I saw something literally like walk, not glide, I won't say glide because that's so typically like ghosty, but like shifting, like as if someone was like kind of sort of walking at a decent pace past the hatch to come round. And I've literally physically stopped what I'm doing and like lean to like see who it is, to see who comes through, and there's nobody there. But anyway, it was never like, oh my gosh, I'm haunted, I'm gonna get possessed. I was more just like, oh, that's really weird. But anyway, it was only, I mean, it would have been a fair bit ago now, but it was years later that I was talking to my dad, and he brought it up that he'd experienced the same thing, and I hadn't prompted. I made like an off-the-cuff joke about the living room and kitchen being haunted, and he just said like, oh well, to be fair, I do see something walking past the hatch sometimes. And like, I remember my like blood going cold. I was like, what? So yeah, who knows? Maybe it's somebody who just got stuck or whatever, or maybe I was being haunted. But still, it's not super exciting, really, is it? It's probably just a trickle of light. But that's definitely gonna do it. Little bonus story at the end there. But yeah, I really hope you did enjoy this video, guys. If you could do me a massive favour, if you're able to, and do give this video a like. And if you are new to the channel, then consider subscribing. Plenty more scary stories to come. Like I said, as long as you want them, I will never stop doing them. But anyways,